A couple of days ago, I made a video about Madagascar's Gen Z protests and how crucially it wasn't just the people that were protesting the president and his administration. The elite CAPSAT division of the Madagascan military of the African island nation, they joined the Gen Z protests, the revolt that it became against the government after the president at the time, Andry Rajoelina, reportedly ordered the military to fire on protesting civilians. CAPSAT said hell no and defected. Well, today, the head of that elite CAPSAT, Michael Randri A Nirina, am I saying that correct? I don't know. He's been sworn in as the new president. Michael, I'll call him. Now, Western spin, of course, will immediately begin to spin if they report on Madagascar at all, to be honest. Some might just give it a dodge because, it's in Africa. Who cares? That might be the perspective. But the spin will be, if there is coverage, that this is a military dictatorship now. Madagascar has fallen, guys. Democracy is over in the country. What are we going to do? It must be bad, right? Democracy is fallen. So, is that correct? Well, not entirely. Here's the news and the analysis of Madagascar's alignment now and moving forward. The stuff the Western legacy media are not likely to share with you because it's not got that Western spin. It doesn't assume the West is the best, and for the rest, you should just be following in our footsteps. First off, yes, a colonel, right, a military man is now the president of Madagascar. I remind you guys, Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso and the head of state of Mali and Niger, the other two countries that make up the three countries of the Alliance of Sahel states, look it up, they too are military men. Yet reports are coming out of that West African region, that alliance, that significant changes, positive changes for the people of those African states are well underway, and crackdowns on corruption in each of these three countries makes regular headlines on news outlets that cover Africa. Pan-African, for example, supporters, African liberation activists, they look especially towards Ibrahim Traoré, a military leader, as a revolutionary that's completely transforming the country for the better, nationalizing resources, providing healthcare benefits, making sure that former colonial powers like France and the UK don't have the kind of access and skewed trade relationship with these African countries that they once had. Governments that centralize power versus governments that are democracies. That's a long discussion with strengths and weaknesses and nuances throughout, and we won't get into that. I'm not a supporter of authoritarian regimes, but honestly, I'm not a clear-cut blind supporter of democracy either, especially for the purpose of my analysis, where I try to give you the news and the analysis without coming in as an activist fighting for one side or another. I'll leave that to you to go off and research, maybe look for some activists that you agree with and you follow them for the fight, basically, that you want verbally, of course, to be fighting for. Not all democracies place the common people at their heart. America being the latest, greatest example, many would argue. More and more, even American voices are calling America an oligarchy, a system of governance where the elite, the wealthy, powerful few, rule over the rest. It's an oligarchy with a democratic mask on, and the mask is coming off in America. That's the assessment of many Americans. Anyway, I digress. Democracies don't always serve the common people. That's what I was saying before I went off on a tangent. And I wanted to say, as a follow-up, centralized governments, what you may have heard be called authoritarian regimes or dictatorships, they don't necessarily mean the people are not served. It's not so cut and dry. And I would encourage you to go forth and do your research and your learning, potentially having to unlearn some things that you've been force-fed from childhood, potentially. In Africa particularly, there's a lot of noise being made in support of strongmen, essentially, who take power and then shove off the chains of covert colonialism and corruption. And many argue that is what keeps Africa from developing at the pace it could. There's African democracies, there's presidents, there's prime ministers, there's elections, but the continent by and large remains poor. What's going on? What's the deal? Scratch below the surface and you see a lot of the time the heads of state democratically elected, well, the elections were skewed in one way or another by certain foreign powers, and you have to essentially, behind closed doors, pledge your allegiance to the former colonial masters, and if you do not, well, then you'll be branded a problematic individual, and you might see yourself booted out in a coup or an election, or through, being listed on the stock market, if you catch my drift. Now, Madagascar's former president, for example, fled the country just a few days ago on a French military plane, I believe. And many pointed to Madagascar still being within France's sphere of influence to this day. Not a colony like it once was, but there's degrees of control that European powers can exercise over African states even today without the African states being colonies outright. And Madagascar and France, the relationship between those two, is no exception to that. Gen Z protests Gen Z were protesting on the issue of power and water shortages, right? And outages and government corruption, and they said this nonsense needs to be addressed. That is what brought Colonel Michael to power. And the question is this man, this is the question Africans are asking, right? Is this man the Ibrahim Traoré of Madagascar? Or is it someone who will end up disappointing the people? The jury is still out. People are still waiting. And they're not going to be blindly giving their allegiance, so it seems. They're ready to rise up again if needed. We'll just have to see how things unfold. It has to be said, Mikhail, who's the military man who's been who's been appointed president, his opening act, his one act that we know of so far, was to not open fire on protesters when the previous president, Andri, demanded that he fire. So, that's a good start, one could argue. Now it's up to the people of Madagascar to wait and see what he brings. Will it be loyalty to the people or loyalty to pure power? And I'll try and keep you posted with the news and the analysis, unbiased and without the Western spin. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Mahfouz, or NewsBaba, if you can't remember my South Asian / Arab name. And I'll see you on the next one.